Hi, I'm transgender. Hi, I'm Archivist, and I recently produced a video essay by the title I Don't Regret Girlhood over on my main channel, which you should totally go check out if you haven't already. It is a nearly hour-long deep dive into my relationship with girlhood as a trans-masc person, and the ways we cope with grief as trans adults, featuring the voices and experiences of half a dozen trans creators and a personal childhood friend. Without spoiling too much, that video was my frantic effort to sort out over 2 decades of gender baggage before taking some really big steps. And in the process, I amassed over 13 hours of interview footage, very little of which made it into the final product. This is the first in a series of lightly edited interviews that we'll be uploading here to the brand new Archivist side channel. They have been cut down slightly to remove personal details and improve pacing, but no important content has been removed. They are, for the most part, the raw, unfiltered words of my trans friends and fellow creatives, because their voices deserve to be heard. Welcome to the Stacks, or whatever we end up calling this place. I am still taking name suggestions. First and foremost, mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lichen. I go by Lycanthropic online. I am a Coyote PNG tuber and a trans-masked non-binary adult. I am but a little guy.
Would you be willing to speak about your relationship with gender as a kid?
I didn't pick up on my gender
Mm-hmm.
until 18, 19, when I started really
Okay.
figuring out oh wait, I'm not a girl. But I also always knew there was something often different about my gender. I was very disconnected from the traditional idea of what everyone thought girlhood was. I was very, I'm not like other girls, and everyone must feel this way, you
I
know?
relate to that so strongly, actually.
Like,
No, the I'm not like other girls complex is
Mhm,
strong.
mhm, mhm. And not realizing it's because you're not a girl.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of it turned into very strong deconstruction of what it meant to be a girl. And I think a lot of that was really, really important to my development as a person and my understanding of what gender is and how it really is like a social construct.
For you, how did girlhood manifest? Would you say girlhood is a thing that you had?
I would say yes, 100%. I
Mm-hmm.
would say girlhood is something that was very intrinsic to learning who was as a
Mm-hmm.
person, and it's still something that I'm comfortable with saying was a huge part of my life, you know? Um, I I think a lot of it was taking things that were traditionally thought
Mm-hmm.
of as girlhood and twisting them in a way that felt unique to me. Taking things like playing with dolls
Mm-hmm.
and going, what if I did this wrong on purpose? What if everyone's being like, oh, we're playing house. Who wants to be the mom and the dad and the kid? And I was like, what if I'm the dog?
No, I think that does though also connect to, and I've talked about this a couple times. I think both on and off stream with you, vaguely in VCs. I do know one thing with you that, well, it was not my personal experience. It's something that I find very fascinating and plan to write a future video essay on. Are you okay with me using the term horse girl to describe your childhood self?
Fully, fully.
All right, cool. You were a horse girl.
Yes. I grew up in a fairly big city,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I personally didn't have horses. I grew up spending summers with my grandma in the countryside, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And she always had horses growing up when I was growing up. Like, she had two horses, Fanny and Sam. Fanny was this big old mare, and Sam was he was a little shit. We weren't allowed to
Sounds
ride
about
Sam.
right.
Sam was a little shit. Sam was the one you had to be careful walking behind.
Yeah.
And Fanny was
Aw.
just this sweet, chill lady who would just vibe out and go, "Oh, you're putting a toddler on me? Yeah, okay." So there are fully pictures of tiny little Lichen in a big bike helmet with my dress tucked into my underwear because I didn't want to take off the dress. Sitting on top of this horse that's like I look like a doll on top of this horse. This is a massive horse. And there are just
That is
multiple pictures of me
incredible.
just vibing out, being like, yep, I'm on a horse. I'm just the littlest guy. Horses are such a cool creature because they are simultaneously so powerful and, at the end of the day, dangerous animals who can do a lot of damage, but they're also very gentle and sensitive creatures who you need to be very in tune with to be able to
Yeah.
interact with in a healthy way. And I think it's a really cool thing that you're exploring the relationship between queerness, between gender, and an attraction to horses as an animal, because they really are such a good representation of the breakdown of gender, of like what it actually means societally, and how many young queer, specifically mostly AFAB people, who see horses as this stereotypically feminine thing and go, wait, but it's not. And I'm going to make that powerful in and of itself. My mom is also queer, which in and of itself is real cool. But she also grew up a fucking horse girl. She grew up riding horses and doing like vaulting, professional vaulting, and like it's so cool looking back and being like, oh no, like this is not only like a fairly universal queer experience, but also like a generational thing.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to have that kind of connection as well, going like, oh, this was I can see where she had that same kind of energy of like, this is using this as my strength kind of thing. I knew I was queer from very young. I knew I thought I was a lesbian for
I
years and years.
I went through that phase. Which is
Literally
shocking given how gay I am.
from about 7 years old, I knew I wasn't straight, and I assumed that meant I was a lesbian. And I went, all right, autistic black and white thinking, that means I'm a lesbian.
Okay, I need to ask, did you also do the thing where you like, I'm pretty sure I'm a lesbian, but I'm uncomfortable with the term because it implies femininity despite not having figured out the gender shit yet?
Yes, the most like, I'm gay, I'm queer, I'm sapphic. Which, like, good for you, kiddo, but like, come on, you didn't realize? And it was something that was actually like brought to my attention when I was younger, when I first started identifying with like the sapphic, the lesbian terminology, when I was like, okay, I think this is what I am. And people were like, so you've shown interest in guys before. So are you not? I mean, I went hard the no, I've never been interested in men. I girls. I figured it out. This is all there is to look at. I don't need to look any further into this. I did it. I had this very strong distaste for traditional masculinity, and I didn't understand why. And I think part of that was due to my inherent like being non-binary and not understanding the why there even was this dichotomy of gender. not understanding why you had to be either feminine or masculine and why people had to go so hard either way. And I started realizing there was some non-binary stuff in like late high school when I was like, oh, you can use they for me. It's not like the first one on the list, but it doesn't bother me. When I graduated high school, I started experimenting with my presentation a little more. I shaved off half my hair.
Mm-hmm.
I had been growing out my hair super long for grad. And so that was like a big step for me is going like, okay, as soon as graduation hits, I'm letting myself shave off half my hair. Um, and that was around when I started going a little bit harder into the they pronouns and playing around with gender. And then when I moved away from home, um, I moved out of my mom's house at 21 and moved across the water onto a nearby island, which is where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And having that kind of disconnect, being in a new space where the I knew very few people, let me start experimenting a little bit more and going, wait a second, now that I don't have this anxiety I didn't even realize was there of people who already know me as this one person, I can start playing around and finding what feels more true to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was only here for 2 years before COVID hit. So I had, 2 years of solidly being like, all right, they, them, maybe a sprinkle of he here and there. And then COVID hit and isolation hit, and there was a lot more time for self reflection, a lot more forced time for self reflection, and for deconstructing like what gender meant to me and like
Mm-hmm.
what was actually going on there. And I started using he pronouns more often, but the relationship I was in at the time, I had gotten into when we were both solidly identifying as non binary. And as the relationship went on, she started identifying more as a trans woman, and I started identifying more with trans masc experience.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, she ended up, unfortunately for me, but fortunately for her, she ended up identifying as a lesbian. Um, so we were no longer compatible in that sense. But stepping out of that relationship and realizing that, like, oh, I was actually like holding back on some of my identity for the sake of my partner and going, okay, the feelings I'm feeling about having done that, even unintentionally, mean that there's more going on here, and I need to actually look at my gender and reassess, like, am I a man? You know? And coming to terms with the fact that like I am a non-binary man. I think that was like the biggest, like most solid step for understanding gender.
I'm curious if you would call a lot of what you've experienced there grief, and if in the effort of identity formation there were times where you, I guess, experienced a grieving of yourself.
Yes. Absolutely. There's definitely been times where I have had to sit with the fact that the the me that I thought
Mm-hmm.
would exist when I was younger does not and will not ever exist. And that was something I had to grieve
Mm-hmm.
because I had created this idealized version of that was a combination of what I wanted to be when I was younger and what I thought I had no choice but to be. and what I had decided I was okay with being without realizing how much following through with that path would hurt me. And being able to sit back and go, oh, like that's never going to happen. This life I thought I was going to lead just is not going to happen, and that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing. I'm happier now. I never thought I would be this happy, but it's it leaves you a little lost. You've planned your whole life. You've thought like, okay, this is what's going to happen in my life. It may not be like exact things, but like I I was in college for a few years. I ended up not completing my degree, partially because my mental health took a really big dip when I started thinking too hard about following through with what I thought my future needed to be. I started getting a lot of preemptive grief that ended up causing me to step away from school because the future that I was in the process of trying to create had such a disconnect in my brain from what was actually happening. I went into college straight out of high school, and I had always thought that that was what I was going to go to college. I was going to get like a bachelor in the arts at the very least. Maybe go into something museum curation or library sciences or, archaeology, something along those lines. And that I would, have some kind of nebulous career that I hadn't specifically settled on. And also looking back at that now and realizing why some of those grand plans I had were so nebulous, why I couldn't pin exactly what my future was going to look like, realizing like why that is, and it's because I couldn't see myself, even though I could see the plan I had for myself.
What did the process of deciding to start HRT look like for you? What was it that, pushed you in that direction?
Honestly, it was coming to the understanding that it wasn't permanent. It was coming to the understanding that it was something that I could try and then put aside if I didn't like. I had been tossing it up for a long time, and I was really scared of what would happen if I ended up not liking the results. If I ended up being wrong about wanting and needing to go on it. And the more I looked into it and the more I understood that, like, I could start at a small dose. Um, the majority of effects, um, will stop if you stop testosterone, and that some people even will like go back on estrogen manually afterwards to balance things out if they weren't happy with specific effects. Um, so I had been thinking about it for quite a long time, and I didn't have a family doctor at the time. Um, because although Canada's healthcare system definitely has a lot of things good going for it, it is still severely lacking. I am one of the very few people I know who actually has a primary care provider. The majority of people go through telehealth and
Moo.
end up paying out of pocket, even though healthcare is mostly free here up when you are seeing like an actual in-person doctor. Um, so at the time, I ended up starting to talk to a local trans youth clinic. And I initially was seeing them for some free therapy resources, and I started talking about, hey, I want to try going on testosterone. I want to talk more about what that would mean, and what get on the list. And the provider that I ended up talking to was a trans man, and having that kind of open discussion about gender and about, the possibilities of like playing with your gender, about like taking your gender a little bit less seriously
Mm-hmm.
to find yourself, with somebody who not only had personal experience but was also a professional in exactly that field. Um, was really, really helpful. And it ended up being a very much, all right, you want to try this? Cool. Here's your check mark on your box. Here's your prescription. We're setting you up with some blood tests. This is going to be the doctor you talk to about this when you come back to it. Here you go. Here you go. And when I actually decided, it happened very, very quickly. And I had so much privilege in that. I do want to recognize like where I am and the privilege that I was afforded to be able to start it that quickly and painlessly is
Mm-hmm.
something that not many people get the opportunity to. Um, like straight up, and that's something that I've had to recognize, that like the
Yeah.
ease that I had in accessing HRT is not the norm. Um, so yeah, I was on it for about a month before I decided, holy shit, this is life changing. Um, my body took very, very well to it very fast, and everything that I was like anxious about, I was anxious about
Mm-hmm.
facial hair. That was a big one, um, because I had always been very, very self conscious about my appearance, especially as when I was in elementary school, I was a very thin and fit person. I was in martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
I had a fucking six pack at 12 years old. Probably a natural hormonal imbalance going on that going on testosterone helped settle. Right, right.
It's
It's like,
very
oh,
funny.
my body actually like was wanting this.
How has a transition, and particularly medical transition being on HRT, impacted your relationship with girlhood and femininity?
Honestly, it's let me get a lot more in touch
Mm-hmm.
with femininity as of recently. I've been on testosterone for over 4 years now, and prior to being on testosterone, I went through a very heavy femme phase. I was leaning very hard into the full face makeup. I was um, dressing up and like feeling super feminine in general because I wanted to feel good about myself, and I knew that if I dressed up and did my makeup and everything, at least I would feel pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a way to feel good about myself without having to think too hard about why it felt good. Looking back on it, it's because I was having fun in drag, like straight up. And when I started testosterone, I lost a bit of that.
Yeah.
I did lean a little bit into the, all right, I've been on testosterone for a few months now. I'm starting to get like the physical changes. I'm not as comfortable presenting feminine anymore because my goal is at this moment I'm being misgendered and I don't want to be misgendered. I haven't figured out how to make myself feel good being pretty the way I was using being pretty pre-transition. It was something that was a shield for me. It was, if people aren't going to see who I am regardless, at least I can control who they're seeing.
Yeah. That's
And
very,
when I
very real,
lost,
actually.
right, and then when I lost a little bit of control,
Mm-hmm.
I felt a little bit less control of how people were perceiving me because people were recognizing that there was some gender fuckery going on, and not the kind that people fetishize, more the kind that was like actual gender transition and
Right.
coming to terms with myself. Um, and it took a while for me to be comfortable playing around with femininity again. Um, it actually took until my beard started growing in. And when my beard grew in, I was like, you know what? People think I'm a weird little cis man now. Like, cis people think I'm a weird little cis man. At least until I talk. And I am now comfortable enough knowing that at the very least, cis people with no idea what's going on in the queer community are going to look at somebody with a beard and makeup, and they are still going to assume I am a man.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's a very simplistic and like not correct way of perceiving queer people with a beard and makeup.
Yeah.
It was something that I knew I could take advantage of
Yeah.
for my personal gender. Um, and I realized that like
Mm-hmm.
me wearing makeup and being feminine was at the end of the day for me, and always had been, a form of drag.
For me, one of the big hesitations is that where I am at right now, I have the ability to pass either way.
Yep.
I am in a space where I would say I get gendered about 75% femme, about 25% mask. Uh,
Yeah.
and I am scared of losing the privilege that comes from ambiguity. I
Yes.
am scared of losing the ability to, when it is necessary and when it is safer, present as a woman. And having the option to shift my presentation to whatever will allow me to be most comfortable in a space, which is a kind of preemptive grief that I am dealing with. It is a fear of the social consequences of being visibly trans. Because I'm not scared of being visibly trans, but there is safety in not transitioning.
There is. There 100% is. And choosing to step outside of that safety bubble, choosing to, knowing that there is a loss of that safety, and going through with it, and choosing to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
go through what you know are going to be like at times very hard experiences, at with the goal of being more true to yourself. It's scary and hard. Like, straight up, it's
Yeah.
scary and hard. And that's okay. Sometimes things are scary and hard, and that's why we've got community to talk to and to support us. And at the end of the day, it's finding finding out where you're most comfortable as yourself, and prioritizing who you are rather than who others perceive you to be.
Right.
And it's a really, really hard thing to do. It's not something that just happens and is done and you're okay with it. It's terrifying sometimes, like knowing that people can clock me as a trans man, as even people who aren't clocking me as a trans man, but people who see me and immediately know there's something queer.
Yeah.
Depending on the space I'm in, that can be really scary. But it's also something that it has become really empowering for me. And that's something that I've recently, like very recently, started to realize that I both want and need to be more visible. I I don't like people thinking I'm cis. And that's not something I ever thought I would feel. I thought I was going to feel much safer passing as a cis man.
Mm-hmm.
And while that is true, while there is safety in passing as a cis man, it doesn't feel right. I feel most like myself when people look at me and they go, oh, that's some kind of fucking queer. And that's not inherently the safest presentation, but it's the most authentic one for me, you know? Even living where I do in a place
Mm-hmm.
where it is incredibly inherently queer, like you cannot throw a rock outside without running into somebody with green hair and pronouns.
Do we love to
Um,
see it?
we love to see it. There is still like a vocal and dangerous minority of transphobic right wing people who
Mm-hmm.
can and do attack queer people. And that's terrifying. But they don't deserve the satisfaction of knowing that they can control how I present with their
Mm-hmm.
beliefs. And at the end of the day, if somebody starts calling me slurs on the street, and this is a very privileged, again, this is something that I experience a lot of privilege in where I live, and it's safe for me to do this. I know it's not a safe course of action for most people, is I can look back at them, raise my voice, and let people know that this person is being transphobic, that this person is being a bigot, and people will stop and stare at them. Like, I can make a big deal of it and have people immediately go, "Oh, this queer person needs people to witness this.
Yeah.
This is not okay." And I think that's also like a very empowering thing to be able to know, like, you know, there are people who recognize that being queer can be an inherently vulnerable thing.
I'm really
And
glad you're able to have like that safety.
yeah, and it's obviously not always the case, but it's something that like the more I become comfortable with in places where it is safer to do that, the more I feel empowered to stand up for myself and be loudly, visibly queer in spaces that are less safe. The more I become comfortable with being loudly and aggressively queer in safe spaces, the safer I feel doing so in spaces that are less safe.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I feel comfortable standing up for other people in those less safe spaces to show them that there are safe people and safe places. Um, Knowing that, you know, me standing up for myself in front of a bigot when nobody else is standing up for me in the middle of some tiny little town could show some baby queer that, like, there are adults and people who will stand up for them and who will make sure the world is a safer place. And that in of itself gives me the confidence to keep being loudly myself.
What is girlhood to you?
Ooh, I
Big
think
question.
it's a big question. It's a big question, and it's one that's definitely a hard one to answer. It's not one that has one
Mm-hmm.
definitive answer. For me, it's because I know a lot of people who are trans
Mm-hmm.
either consider themselves to have always been the gender they are or to have become the gender they are at a specific point.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally don't feel like my experience fits with either of those trains of thoughts. I feel like I was simultaneously always who I am and also was very much a girl when I was younger. I was a boy who was a girl. And For me, girlhood meant definitely like how people were perceiving me
Mm-hmm.
and how I challenged those perceptions while still believing I was a girl, while still like understanding the world as a girl. And a lot of that for me became very, very tied into anti patriarchal thought. Very, very fuck the patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
fuck men culture, fuck straight culture. Uh, let's just be little gremlins. And for me, like being a girl was being a little gremlin, being a little shit. It was sitting in my best friend's backyard at 9 years old, mixing mud potions and, chasing fairies through the yard kind of shit. Uh, Coming back in and being told, holy shit, y'all need a bath. Um, it was pushing my brother uh, down a stairs because he broke the head off of my one Ken doll. Uh, it was going to Taekwondo and being the girl there,
Mm-hmm.
being the only one who wasn't allowed to spar with anybody except the black belt because, yeah, I was a girl, but I was the one who was gonna beat you up. I was in capoeira
Mm-hmm.
from probably 7 or 8 years old, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a Brazilian martial arts that was developed. It looks like dance.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like dance. It is performed with music and was originally developed as a way of hiding um, martial arts training by slaves so that they wouldn't get caught.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. It was disguised as a cultural dance so that they could train and get out. Um, and it is an absolutely beautiful form of martial arts, incredibly powerful, incredibly difficult, um, but was something that I was a part of for probably about 4 years. And then I went into Taekwondo after that, and was in Taekwondo in like late elementary school through early high school. And very similar experience where
Mm-hmm.
initially they were like, all right, I was older than a lot of the other classmates. I was just at the cusp of like almost being in the adult class for when I was in Taekwondo. So I was older than the other students, but also like a bit of a problem
Uh-huh.
because I was very cocky.
Yeah.
Uh, I was very, I have the very classic. I'm a girl, but I can be strong. I can beat up the guys. I can do all the things that guys can do. I can carry all the chairs to the classroom by myself. And ended up getting paired up with the instructor, with the one black belt who was just there to like practice in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and my brother because he knew how
Real.
to handle me.
Real.
My 3 years younger than me brother, who was like, all right, I've got anger issues, let's go. A lot of my girlhood was channeled through martial arts, was channeled
Mm-hmm.
through uh, physical activity, through playing in the dirt, running around in the streams, pretending we were weird little fey creatures, and fucked up versions of playing house.
I'm still figuring out how and where I want to fit this into the script. But I want somewhere in it to talk on the weight and trauma of girlhood. Because while I believe that girlhood is something that in many ways is beautiful and meaningful and will forever have marked my life in ways that I value, it has also at many times been a source of strain and grief and stress.
When I hit puberty, I gained a lot of weight. And part of that was because my parents got divorced. And I became incredibly depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up withdrawing personality-wise quite a lot. Ended up being very quiet for quite a few years, and as well as lashing out a little bit more. And later in high school, ended up, unfortunately, me and my mom together, post her divorce, ended up dieting together quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And part of this was due to the way that people perceive women in our society and how being anything other than like a below a size 6 is considered to be unhealthy, to be fat, and for fat to be a bad thing. And I think that's something that has been very unfortunately very tied into our culture's notion of femininity in the past, couple hundred years. The idea that women, that femme people, that the beauty is tied to physical form, that it's tied to weight specifically, was something that it was and is a very harmful idea that media really, really feeds into, and not enough people are aware of just how harmful that kind of talk is for young people who are developing. Not just young people who are perceived as women, but also young people whose ideas of what a woman is are being influenced by this. And I dealt with a lot of active fat phobia growing up, partially because it was something that happened very suddenly for me, where I went from being someone who was very, very fit, who was doing martial arts a lot, to in high school, I stopped doing martial arts. I started doing more theater adjacent stuff, and I started doing a lot less physical activity because I was depressed. And I do think part of that, looking back on it as a trans adult, is tied into unrecognized dysphoria. A lot of, I'm not happy with my body, and and I've decided that it's because of my weight. And because of that, I don't need to look too much harder into why I'm unhappy with my body.
I want to talk about the way that girlhood shifts to womanhood.
There's a point where girlhood starts to be sexualized, I think, is a big point that I noticed. When people started paying attention to your body, to how your existence can be almost like of service to other people, if that makes sense. It's your body no longer feeling like your own anymore. Like it belongs to society rather than you as an individual. I would say I first started to notice it probably when puberty started to hit. So around between 8 and 12, was sort of a dynamic change between not only me and my peers, but me and the adults in my life. that was when people started saying, actually, no, it's not appropriate for you to wear that. You need to be more modest. You need to be aware of how other people are perceiving you. And it wasn't necessarily an all at once, but it was definitely a noticeable shift when, my body started changing.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a distinct shift, I think, the in the community of, for kids, my peers, my age, um, of kids starting to pay more attention to each other as well, in terms of crushes, in terms of who it was appropriate to play with. There was a certain point around that age where it was no longer acceptable to play with the boys. Where the boys no longer wanted to come play with the girls. Where instead of, playing house, playing Red Rover, people started sitting in a circle and talking about who they thought was cute. And as a queer child who didn't have context for my gender or my sexuality yet, it felt like putting on a performance. It felt like, oh, okay, no, I have to play the part now. I need to choose someone who I have a crush on, because that's what you do. I assume, that's what you do. And we're going to sit around and we're going to talk about what boys are cute. And it sucked. Wanted to play Red Rover, I wanted me and my classmates to stand in a line holding hands and have one person barrel at us and try and knock through the line. I wanted to play tag and grounders, but that wasn't what you did as a preteen.
Circling back a little bit, I am curious as a trans person about like your childhood experiences with expectations of things like motherhood.
That's an interesting one because I,
Mm-hmm.
from very, very early on, had very solidly decided that I personally did not want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
From like 5 years old, was like, nope, not happening. If I ever have children, they will be adopted. Small anecdote. When I was around 4 or 5, and I was visiting my grandma in a rural town in the States, um, she took me to Sunday school, and I'm not somebody who grew up religious.
Mm-hmm.
My mom, like, explicitly did not include any religion in my upbringing because she grew up super religious and she had separated herself from that. So I didn't have, especially at that age, have much idea of what to not say
Yeah.
in religious settings. And in this very rural town, they were talking about Adam and Eve and how, children are made between a man and a woman who love each other very much and respect God and all that. And I had just, that previous week, finished a very neurodivergent queer line of interrogation towards my mother,
Uh-huh.
who had ended up explaining how lesbians have babies was the question. So I had recently learned about in vitro
Uh,
fertilization.
that is incredible.
The Sunday school teacher was not impressed. My grandma was told not to bring me back. But
So I guess attached to that, like the traumas, particularly around like the expectations of motherhood, is not something that's going to particularly resonate with you.
I think yes and no, because,
Mm-hmm.
well, it was something I personally decided very early on. That doesn't mean that the
Mm-hmm.
expectations of society and of family weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was definitely something that was always assumed by other people that would be the case for me. And that assumption always made me incredibly uncomfortable, especially considering the assumption that I would be the one to have the children, and not at that point recognizing that there was, to a large extent, dysphoria involved there. Um, a lot of it took a very, very long time for me to get it to sink into my extended family's head that, like, no, 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 you're not getting grandkids from me. You can stop asking. Um, the more you ask, the less likely it is to happen, actually. And just having that constant expectation of, okay, but this is a phase.
Yeah.
They'll grow out of this. When I first when I had my first partner, um, it was the first time, like, I never properly came out, but it was the first time I was, like, first time I had a partner, so it was the first time I was visibly in a queer relationship. And people were like, oh, wait, that wasn't just a personality thing. This is actually, like, huh, okay. And it took a long time for specifically my grandparents to realize that, like, oh, this isn't a phase. This isn't something they're gonna. Me asking if they have a boyfriend yet isn't going to magically make grandkids happen someday. I'm glad, definitely glad that my family, for the most part, eventually came to the conclusion that, this is who I am. I'm not going to change myself for other people. But it took a long time, and it took actually me temporarily cutting a lot of them out of my life, for them to get to the point where they will believe me. Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's, well, I personally never had to struggle much with, like, whether or not I was going to have kids. There was always a lot of disappointment in myself, honestly, growing up. In that, maybe, like, am I broken? Is there a reason? Like, why don't I want kids? Especially when I know I'm good with them.
Yeah.
I worked in childcare for a long time, and I enjoyed being around kids, and it took a long time for me to become comfortable with the fact that I didn't want them.
What is your relationship to the concept of boyhood?
Boyhood for me is always something that I, especially when younger, was very envious of. I always felt that there was a lot of freedom in boyhood, especially having a younger brother. And the majority of the people who I spent a good chunk of time with being boys. When I reached, like, later in elementary school and in high school, I started hanging out with a lot more women, a lot more femme people, and a lot more um, queer people in general. But when I was younger, a lot of the people in my neighborhood that I hung out with were the boys. Um, so there was definitely some jealousy there, and, like, the idea that boys could present themselves a little more freely, be a little bit more honest about their emotions when, at this point we were quite young, so there was a little bit less of the men suppressing emotions aspect. Um, but I always had so much fun, playing Pokemon and playing hockey and going and hanging out at my friend's house and playing on our game systems on the GameCube. Having water fights with water guns and hoses. And those were always things that, well, I enjoyed. It always felt like I was the outsider looking in, even when I was participating. It was very much, I felt like I was invited into the space, but not part of it. And I think a lot of that early interaction with boyhood shaped how I, as an adult, express my boyhood, you know, in that I'm just a little guy. I sit here, I play my video games. I laugh and I hang out with friends. Um, I I'm open about my feelings as much as I can be, and I think that is a huge part for me of boyhood, especially compared to what my girlhood was, which was very um, embracing boyhood as girlhood.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my experience with girlhood was co-opting what I thought was boyhood into my version of girlhood. One of my favorite like epitome of boyhood.
Mm.
On my 16th birthday, I had a sweet 16th. We held it in the community center in my co-op, and it was super fun. It was candy themed. Had all my friends from high school over, and one of the boys in my neighborhood, who I was very close with growing up, um, decided he wanted to mess with me. And he found a bunch of worms and decided to chase my friends all around with a handful of worms. And I always felt like a little like weird for not being scared or like squeamish about it. I thought it was hilarious. I was like, show me the worms. Stop running around, bring me the worms.
Put the worms in my mouth.
Right? Like, worms? Let's go. And there was a bit of a disconnect between how I was like, oh hell yeah, my friend's running around with worms. Let's go. It's my birthday. And the reaction of my peers of being, oh no, worms, ah, and running away and screaming and very stereotypically like this is how we're supposed to react as girls when worms are involved. I definitely didn't understand they why everyone was following these kind of like rules of like what happens in this situation, let's say. Like what happens when you see something quote unquote gross. If you're a girl, you run away screaming. If you're a boy, you laugh and make it more gross. And I didn't get it. I just thought the worms were cool.
I know a lot of trans folk will, especially early in transition, experience a very intense grief around the childhood that they did not have, or the childhood they perceived as the one that they should have had.
Mhm.
What's your relationship to that concept?
I definitely felt a lot of grief when
Mm.
I first, specifically when I realized that there was more boy to the equation than I originally thought. Um, when I started connecting more with the he pronouns and realizing, oh, you know, I've been not looking at this part of myself for a very long time to make things easier. Um, and with that realization definitely came the grief of not having had the opportunity to explore that when I was younger. Not necessarily in not having grown up a cis boy, but in not knowing that I was not a girl younger. Because being entirely honest, aside from like occasional, you know, what if situations of what if I was born
Mm.
AMAB, I've never genuinely wished to have been a cis boy. I've never genuinely
Interesting.
wished to be cis
That's
because
actually very fascinating. Because I think that that actually is a marked difference with a lot of the experiences of like other trans folk I've talked to.
specifically as a non-binary person, it's the when I actually sat down and thought about it, when I was experiencing some of this grief of like being perceived a girl growing up, I had to sit down and realize if I had been born AMAB, what what would have happened in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and coming to the conclusion that I would still be trans. If I was AMAB, I would still be trans. And realizing that being trans is an intrinsic part of my identity and who I am as a person. It's part of my soul. There still would have been work to do on my part to deconstruct gender. It wouldn't have been just okay, we're good now. It would have been a different type of experience for sure. But I wouldn't have magically just been cis if I was born AMAB. Um, it, and I think understanding that went a long way for me unpacking like what the grief was. And for me, I think it was a huge part of it was not people not understanding that I was inherently queer, and me not understanding that I was inherently queer and that my life was shaped by that. It took a long time to get to the point where I was like, oh, the reason none of this felt right is because I didn't have the right context. I wasn't looking at this from the right point of view. And now that I have more context, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, no wonder I never like thought, oh, I want to be a cis boy. No wonder I never thought like I've definitely wished that I didn't have to deal with gender stuff, but it never manifested as I wish I was cis. It was always I wish people got it. I wish this wasn't a big deal. I wish we didn't have to deal with all this. I wish I could just be.
What, if anything, have you done to reclaim, experiences of boyhood?
I think a lot of it has been the deconstruction of what beauty means to me. For me,
Okay.
I spent a lot of time as a young adult trying to feel better about myself by making myself pretty. And by trying to almost recreate a version of girlhood that I didn't experience. And obviously that didn't work. But part of reclaiming boyhood for me has been reevaluating my relationship with femininity. For me, as an adult, my boyhood that I'm reclaiming is being a boy wearing heels, being able to be the little guy in a skirt and still be my gender. Having the opportunity to explore femininity from the lens of not being a woman is something that has been very healing for me. And I think reclaiming the femininity is something that has allowed me to reclaim boyhood as well.
That's kind of the end of my questions, but I have one last kind of thing, more of a
Yeah.
thing to say.
Okay.
I've been hyping up and making a big deal about this video here. Talking a lot about how it is something that I need to make at this point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably figured this out already with how much I have been pestering you. But this video is going to be my HRT announcement.
Hell yeah. I had a feeling, but hell yeah. I'm very proud of you. I think this is an amazing way to do it. I think this is a very you way to do it.
It really is, isn't it?
It really is, but it's also, I think, a
Mm,
very important way to do it. I think it's going to be very healing and very cathartic, not only for you, but for a lot of the young queer people who are going to end up watching this video.
I hope so. You have already offered so much support in so many ways in the advice you've offered me and in the reassurance you have given. And it means the world, genuinely.
I'm
You
glad.
you
I
literally gave me the goddamn sizes of the needles I needed to order. So like I will be
listen.
taking up your advice for more, or will be taking up your offer for more advice and guidance in the future, but also
Absolutely. I'm more than
have
happy.
been you have been paramount in making this happen. I hope you know.
Hey, you're still
I'm not
here
someone
and
who
you're working
thinks
on a really cool project
I'm
and you're
trying.
working on something really, really cool for yourself that's going to be, a big change, but a really positive change for you.
I'm trying. I think for me, I'm done grieving. I'm
Hmm.
done waiting. As of today, I am 2 weeks on HRT and things are good. I just hit YouTube partner on the main channel and I've started work on the next video essay. But expect the rest of these interviews to slowly roll out in the coming weeks. If you'd like to catch more of my shenanigans in the meantime, the best place to go will always be Twitch. Thank you for everything. Signing off from the archive.